Cool. I was just reading through your bio. It's fascinating. We definitely have total symmetry as far as beliefs and what we utilize in order to help people overcome addiction, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. So what put you on that path? Was it your own healing journey, or what made you decide, hey, this is the area I want to specialize in?
Oh, well, I had I had a long journey with opiates and benzodiazepines. Um, I was on them for 31 years.
Wow.
The last 15 was fentanyl and Ativan. It's quite a combo.
Yeah.
Um, and anyway, I had this long history of chronic pain, and the doctors didn't know how to treat it with anything other than cure your opiates and your benzos.
Yep.
Until I
Which
finally,
just is a Band-Aid. It doesn't cure anything. It just masks.
well, yeah, I would also say that it exacerbates the problem,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Because of the things that it does to the body.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, they just didn't have another answer, and I knew that their model was limited because I have a science background, and I was trained as a research scientist, so I was taught how to look at a problem and analyze it, and what are the assumptions here. And here's the thing: they assumed I wouldn't heal. That was their assumption. They never asked, why isn't Elizabeth healing? They assumed I wouldn't. So how you
and
heal?
they just wanted to train you how to live with, manage it for the rest of your life. Like it is what it is now, just manage it.
Yeah. And I was just like, you're telling me more about the limitation of your model than the body's ability to heal. So anyway, it took me a while to find Dr. Peter Prescott, who I did find. He left us this book, Conquer Chronic Pain, an Innovative Mind-Body Approach. He was the director of the pain management program at the Betty Ford Center. And when I happened to, my son knew somebody that was connected with him, so I went through Peter's program, and so that was there were 100 patients on campus.
Okay.
400 support people for those 100 patients.
Wow.
80 went to relapse school in the afternoon, and 20 of us went to Pain Track to talk to Dr. Peter's program, chronic pain management. And there were about 20 people in that class when I was there. But here's the thing: to answer your question, I asked my counselor, well, what about relapse school? Because I'm not getting any training in that. And she says, there's an 80% relapse rate in the first year. And I started out as a social scientist, and I thought in college, and I thought, well, what's wrong with this model if that's the best we can do, right? And the first thing I thought was, I'm doomed, because I didn't like the odds. And the second part was like, we got to do better. And I vowed at that moment that when I got out and got my sea legs in my own recovery, that I would dedicate my life to changing the trajectory of that needle on the relapse rate. So that's what put me on this path.
I love that, because you're right. So much of the other philosophies build into it. Relapse is part of recovery. And so it's almost from day one, giving the individual the back door of like, well, this is going to be normal for me to continue to not succeed, as opposed to saying that doesn't have to be part of recovery. Maybe that's some people's journey, but it doesn't have to be everyone's journey. In fact, it doesn't have to be anyone's journey. It's your own choosing.
And the other side of that coin is, and if there's relapse, it's not shameful.
Right.
It just means you need to come back and try again, and you need to do something different.
Yep.
Right. Because there's a lot of there's already shame in the addiction, sphere, and the sphere of influence. And we don't need to add any more shame into it than is already there.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. When we get people who relapse, like clients, and their biggest part about coming back, even though they know we're the ones that are going to help them and they believe that, is the shame and guilt they feel like we're going to be disappointed. Or and then
Mhm.
once they get back and everybody, lovingly embraces them and we're glad you're here, all that stuff falls away. And it's like, okay, what did I miss next time? Or what do I need to go deeper on this time? But that fear really prevents people from getting help they need after that relapse, ego and everything else tied into it.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's, for my work at trauma, I did a lot of trauma work, and I've had trauma training and stuff, and I would say that tendency to relapse again, and that shame that is the shadow of that, the super shadow of that,
Yeah,
that's all related to a trauma response that's gone unhealed,
exactly.
right? So, and that's not, you and I are sitting on the edge of the paradigm in terms of kind of the general knowledge in at least the United States, and I would think Canada too, um, around that understanding,
Yeah.
versus addictions and moral failure. That's just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're also up against an agenda that would prefer that everybody stay medicated and stay on prescription drugs, call themselves sober, and not really overcome anything, just switch it out for something legal. So we have a lot of programming that's gone into people for that agenda that we also have to sort of overcome and say, no, that doesn't have to be part of recovery.
Yeah.
Medication doesn't have to be part of recovery. Management doesn't need to be part of recovery. You can actually
Yeah.
just recover.
That's right. Yeah. There's a lot of what I would call inertia in the system.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And I remember when I went into treatment, they had, uh, they had, medication that they were going to, it's like a half measure. So buprenorphine,
Mm-hmm.
and it's whatever, it's kind of not the trade name, but what's the other name? I don't,
Suboxone.
Suboxone, yeah.
Yeah.
So they gave me this cocktail, and to help me detox there for was 12 days in a detox bed, right? In hospital bed,
Yeah.
detoxing. They had a little detox hospital at the center. And then they gave me 5 days of Suboxone after
Mm-hmm.
that. And I remember saying to Peter coming into that program, um, okay, he said, this is what I'm gonna do. And I said, okay, but I don't want to come out on anything. I don't
Yeah.
want to come in on this and go out on something else.
Yeah.
I'm so done with this, right?
Yeah.
And that was the deal. And he honored it.
Isn't
And
it interesting that you almost had to fight for that? Like that is the differentiator with my program is we get everybody off everything before they even leave detox. And so they do their whole program completely drug-free and sober, but no other most programs are looking for like limited liability. Are they comfortable, billable days? Like, let's just, there's no actual program or recovery. It's more just like a place to stay, some meetings, and, you switch out the medications, which is crazy because people don't realize. I was just talking to one of my clients in the gym, stuff they were put on as a teenager. You have ADHD. Here's your Ritalin. It was almost like grooming them to be drug addicts at such a young age and telling them they needed these drugs to be manageable or manage their lives. And so many of them end up being addicts because of early introduction from professionals.
yeah, how are you going to tell a child to sit down and be quiet?
Right. Yeah. And
No
my
wonder
first question would be, what's their diet and exercise look like? What are you feeding them?
exactly. Like, how
Yeah.
can you? That's just, anyway, I just, yeah, there's like I said, there's a lot of inertia in the system that's keeping
Mhm.
us from being really living a healthy and thriving life. And we're definitely in the trenches.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
definitely in the trenches. So
We
it's kind
are.
of one person, one soul at a time.
Yeah. Well, and that's what we can do, sort of free people's mind and let them realize, through practice. I mean, it doesn't just happen. There's got to be work. You got to work at it. It doesn't just, you don't just make a decision. Now you're fixed and this is never a problem. And
Oh,
I think a
100%.
lot of people are they get put off by the work that they would have to put into it in order to overcome it. It's almost like that comfortable hell kind of situation. But,
Well,
but again, a lot of people also don't want help because they don't realize there's other methods out there, right? They don't realize there's people like you or me. They just know what the vast majority knows, and they've, not been successful with that, or it doesn't align with them. And so they almost are like hopeless because they don't realize there's so many different avenues you could go to what resonates with you to get the best outcome.
exactly. And I didn't even know about the recovery community
Mm.
until I met Dr. Peter. I didn't even know it existed. My prescribing doctor knew about it, but he didn't feel that I was an addict and that it was a thing. He never introduced. I mean, it was interesting. Very different. Prescribing doctor, one thing,
Yeah.
Dr. Peter, completely different animal. I'm like, dude, where have you been all my life? I've been looking for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good
Yeah.
for him.
Yeah.
So besides getting you off everything, what was the modality? Was it somatic therapy, like the really handling the trauma, or figuring out how to better handle trauma?
Well, he did a lot of things in that program.
Mm.
I was there 52 days, 12 of it was in a bed. But he brought in, pardon me, he brought in breath work, taught us
Mm.
how to breathe.
Hmm.
He brought in Qigong, which I did hatha yoga, but a very kind of like yin yoga, very low energy kind, just to keep me flexible.
Hmm.
They had a vinyasa class there. I couldn't do that. It was too much. I didn't have the physical, I didn't have the strength, but
Yeah.
I could do his Qigong starting on day one. After I got out of that, even though I was in a wheelchair, I could stand up for 20 minutes and do that, which is amazing, right? So
Yeah.
very tailored Qigong routine. It's very clearing.
Hmm.
He
And just
did,
for our listeners, Qigong is you're working with the energies. Is that also the ones using directional work, like
I,
east, south, north? No.
well, they really work with the um, lower dantian. We call it the navel point in yoga, but I'm more of a yogi than a qigong person. But it's the lower dantian, which is just a little below the navel, the umbilicus,
Got it.
and we're kind of centered there, and we learn how to move energy from there with the hands and the
Yeah.
breath. It's hands and breath, and in a very, and it's I asked Peter, where did he learn all this stuff? He started kung fu when he was 6, and he
Oh,
was my
wow.
age. So I was like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So he taught us this beautiful energy
Um,
movement to move stuck energy in the body that comes from China.
yeah.
So that was kind of cool. So this holistic. He also brought in an ancestral clearing practitioner, John
Mm.
Newton, Health Beyond Belief. And I do that now because I was just like, you gotta be kidding. This is amazing. It's just powerful.
Is
So he
that similar to I did constellation therapy not that long ago, and it felt similar in it, it was a playing out of stuff that I couldn't possibly have known or been there for. It's
yeah,
fascinating work.
it's not that because I know that work,
Okay.
but it's a cousin.
Okay.
You end up with a very similar result. So, right, in that way they're
Yeah.
similar.
Which is
Um,
amazing.
yeah. And so there's that. And then he also brought in the concept of community
Mm.
and support. And so he had every Thursday, he had this thing called adversity. I think he called it Adversity Thursday. And we would come and you're going to laugh at this. We would come in and each one of us, one at a time, would put something, into the circle about something that they'd gone through, and everybody would support them around re-scripting that script around that thing.
Yeah.
Well, I come from a family, I come from a background of like, don't show anybody your feelings because there are going to be repercussions
Yeah.
if you do that.
Yep.
So, that's my training. And so
Yeah.
I get in this and I I'm a biologist. Like I study plants and ecosystems. And so I understood systems, right? And I
Yeah.
knew how to analyze stuff. So I'm very mental, not so much in the body, wanting to be anywhere but in here because it hurts so much, right?
Yeah.
And emotions, no, I don't do those. So I'm watching these people one at a time. They were in a big circle. One at a time do the, I had this thing happen to me and then start to cry and they're whatever. I'm just going like,
Yeah.
this is interesting. And the next person it got to me, and next person, I just didn't even. I'm just like I didn't feel. First of all, I didn't feel safe,
Yep.
and I really didn't even think they wanted to hear from me. So I just went next person, and they allowed that time, and then we went around and came around again, and I was like, so I'd seen the whole room and a half do it, and I'd heard their stories and seen the process and the connection and the support and everything, and I thought to myself, okay, maybe I can just put a little bit of emotion into something right into, and so whoop, out it went, and into the center, I kind of, shared something, and I waited, but I waited, and my whole body was, I was tense. I was waiting for the hit. I was waiting to get hit. And you know what happened? Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody laughed. Nobody hit me. Nobody yelled at me. It was fine. And that was when the ice began to break in me,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that was very powerful. That was
Yeah.
very powerful.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just, when you're in the correct environment, that's
Exactly.
where you can truly let down your guard. And again, at my center, that's what I hear all the time is like, this is the first time I could actually relax. The first time I could actually laugh. The first time I can be vulnerable without fear of, something bad happening by sharing. Like it's so many people just live their whole lives that way.
Mm.
Um, which is sad to think, and I often think that those of us that have overcome addiction, we're sometimes in a better spot because things got so bad. We were forced to, you know, fix it or overcome it. And so we've gotten a lot of learnings where, your average person
Mhm.
who's led a decent life may not have had that same opportunity to really do the deep, dark shadow work, trauma work, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Another thing, I just want to bring in to kind of go back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Sure.
People, are also hesitant, um, in the chronic pain space, because I know that space really well. And for the audience, chronic pain is any pain that's felt 15 days out of 30 for 3 months or more, physical, mental, emotional. The brain can't tell the difference between a broken bone and a broken heart. It's all the same to the brain.
Mm.
So I had that for a long time, and it was physical and emotional and spiritual. And I was in and out of hospitals, and surgery, and rehab, and physical rehab kind of places, and um, in and out for 3 decades. And so I got to know the chronic pain site. I knew my own, but I got to see other people, which was kind of helpful, just to, I'm not alone. I'm
Sure.
alone, but I'm not alone. Like other people are having this experience. So I'm not completely crazy, right? I got crazy in my family. So when things get weird and I think I'm doing something not like other people, then I kind of figure I just went crazy, right? Anyway, I used to be.
Used to be, not anymore. And you're definitely
Right.
not alone.
Yeah. So so the problem there is that chronic pain steals our attention away from everything that except it. And I certainly did, and many of us get identified with the pain. We forget that we're just having the experience of not who we are, but we're having, we forget that.
Mm.
And so the thing is, to do something different might mean it's worse, because
Mhm.
the mind is gonna, chronic pain, one of the things it does, it creates this more negativity in the mind that we already have. So we get worried and we catastrophize and we ruminate on bad stuff, and
Mm.
it's just this scary, scary, scary place. So when you ask a chronic pain sufferer, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, to do something different, they're one of the most courageous people in the world, because look at what they're coming up against.
Right.
What if it gets worse? Right. So I say to everybody that comes into recovery, because they're all suffering from chronic pain, they're the bravest people in the world.
Mhm.
Yeah. First there was unresolved trauma, then there was chronic pain, and then there was addiction.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and they just identify it. It is who they are. And the thought of not having it also can play into, well, then who am I if I don't have this?
Oh my God. Yes, I know. I know our stories are that's a big part of that. Was one of the things that I love so much about the work that Peter and John did in Pain Track, and then there was another woman there, Gisela, who was a psychotherapist. So the three of them were the kind of the core of that program.
Mm.
Um, they helped me really and all of us, they helped us understand the power story and how it kept us trapped. And you know what Peter said? One of the first things he said, it blew me away. When I went into his classroom, he said, first he said, don't judge the moment. And I was just kind of like, I'm not judging anything, dude. I'm just sitting here minding my own business. you see the, you see the, don't mess with me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right away, right?
Yeah.
And then he says, what are you doing to contribute to your pain?
Mm.
And I was like shocked that he would ask such a question in a room full of chronic pain sufferers. How, in my mind, I'm like, I didn't
Right.
say it out loud. Remember, I was taught to be quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, so how dare you? How could you say that in front of, it's doing it, the pain is doing it to us. So that went through my mind really quickly. So again, very protective.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a way about him. And I had respect for teachers, and he had the room. So, I was there to learn from him.
Yeah.
And I realized, and I paused, there was a pause between when he said that and when he said something else. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, he just took me from being completely a complete victim,
Victim. Yep.
pain's doing it to me,
Yep.
to the possibility that I actually might have some power in this equation,
Yeah.
right?
And might
Just by
possibly be creating it somehow.
Yeah, just by the question, he took me from
Yeah.
empowerment from victimhood to empowerment, because I heard the answer in the assumption in the question was, maybe you're doing something. I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
That was news to me. That was great news to me. So that was,
Great news, but it does take a process to get there because, again, all those defense mechanisms say, we're the victim of this stuff. And it's such a shift to go, but what if I'm not? What if I'm creating it somehow?
yeah,
It's so empowering, but you can't just like call that out for somebody. Like they have to come to that awareness or realization themselves.
that's right. And then they have to, for me, I have the gift of persistence.
Hmm.
I have this, like, I'm like a dog with a bone. I'm just gonna keep chewing until there's no more bone. That's
Yeah.
kind of when I have a problem, you put a problem in front of me, I'm just gonna sit there like a dog with a bone. And this was that.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I see. I've got a new bone now.
Yeah.
I've got a whole new problem here. It was this and now it's this. Right.
Yeah.
But at least there were tools. At least I had a direction that I could work to, instead of this endless spiral of like, yeah, we got nothing over here
Yeah.
except get by with your wits, right?
It's so cool because I've never looked at, well, a couple things. It's easy for me to look at addiction and say, okay, you're never going to overcome it until you take full accountability and responsibility for your own actions of having created this. You're not the victim of a disease. You put yourself in this situation. So it's very easy for me to hold that sort of viewpoint in teachings and working with people. But it's interesting to have, and I believe it in my heart, but I can imagine it's harder for people suffering from chronic pain because there's not but I didn't do anything to create this. This just happened to me. It's in my mind, a vastly not different, it's the exact same concept, but getting people to that point, it seems like it's probably more difficult, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's the exact same thing. They're just got to hear it. It just got to come in a way that they can digest it.
Well, that's the key. That's the key. Because we had, like I said, we had about 20 people in the class.
Yeah.
And I can remember he had a 94% success rate. I walked in with 40 years of chronic pain, and I walked out 52 and 31 years of being on those meds. And I walked out 52 days later with no pain and clean.
Wow. That's a really good success rate.
That's amazing. He had
Yeah.
a 94% success rate in that program.
Yeah.
94%. Now, what happened to the other 6? I'll tell you, I'll give you an example of what happened with the other 6. So we had one person in that group of 20 that I was in, that she just didn't believe it.
Yeah.
She couldn't grasp, she couldn't get to the span. She couldn't just, because there's a span between here and there. This
Yeah.
is where I am, and this is where Peter is, and he's pointing the way, and he's giving us a bridge, and she just couldn't get there.
Yep.
Now, one of the people in that program said the reason is because she was there because she was the reason she was on all that medication was because of a workman's comp thing. So she was forced to go.
Mm.
I went because I was freaking ready.
Yeah.
You mean there's an answer? I'm coming.
Yeah. You mean I don't have to live the rest of my life like this? Amazing.
we finally have an answer,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's completely different. It's
Yeah.
completely different. So I think the
Yep.
the environment we come from has to meet the environment we're going into. They have to kind of be able to merge with one another in a peaceful way, and because there's going to be resistance on my side, on
Yep.
there's going to be resistance, there's going to be protection, because that's how we get by, and it's up to the coaches and the counselors, right, and the therapist to help help them unprotect themselves
Yep.
so they can actually get in and they can start doing that work,
Yep.
right, to clear. Yeah.
Well, and it's so good, like in your program and mine, where they can do it in a safe, structured environment. So they're not out there trying to hold down a job and be with their kids while I'm still doing this work on myself. Like there's such power in being able to set all that stuff aside for a short amount of time and just go all in on yourself. And a lot of people aren't afforded that opportunity, but those that are by far can establish like the strongest foundation for everything going forward without all the other stuff. I
Well,
mean,
this is why
it cannot be done, if you're motivated, any of it can happen at any point in time, but getting someone motivated to overcome all those hurdles while still working on themselves, that can be a challenge.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. Yep.
So one thing you said that I would love a little more, because I've never looked at it this way. You said chronic pain is not just physical. You can have chronic pain that's spiritual, mental, or emotional.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How do you quantify that? Like
That's a good question.
well, you said it from the beginning, right? Like 2 weeks of a month for 3 straight months, that would equal chronic, right?
15 days out of 30 for 3 months or more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the way I understand it, the neuroscientist, Peter was a neuroscientist. So he, I learned a lot of stuff from him. I knew some stuff, but he kind of, really fleshed it out for us. The brain, it's the signal that physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, spiritual pain, it's the signal that the body's sending when we have these things. What's the signal that the brain gets? It's the same signal. So the quantific, it's the same, whatever the measurable is, it's the same for all of them. That's the issue, which I thought was very interesting. And then the other thing that I didn't understand until I went into his program, Remember I said the doctors never asked the question, why isn't Elizabeth healing? They just assumed I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And my issue was I had an accident when I was 14. I broke my fifth lumbar and split it in two. The front part slipped forward, pulled the leg nerves with it, eventually became unstable. We had to do surgery. There were 4 surgeries altogether. And every time I had surgery, the pain got worse. But they stabilized the slip. So that didn't make sense. That why isn't that healing? Kind of, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody, I mean, anyway, this is kind of question I was asking. Well, nobody asked about my emotional pain.
Mm-hmm.
They never asked, like, what kind of burden was I carrying from my childhood
Yeah.
before that accident, you know?
Yeah.
They didn't, and then what happened after? Like how did, so it's kind of like an avalanche.
Yep.
Chronic pain can be an avalanche of physical, emotional, spiritual, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Mine wasn't really spiritual. Mine was emotional, physical, psychological.
Which is plenty. that's
Yeah.
that's more than enough to contend with.
Yeah. And then the other piece there, which I blog about this sometimes and people they're so grateful because it's not often talked about. But I actually suffered from medical trauma as well. And so what did that look like? That looked like not getting enough pain medicine after surgery, literally, like for whatever reason that the doctor said, no, you can't get that. And then having to like deal with that.
Yep.
And then the nurses and the doctors all being absolutely deadpan about it. No heart, so that kind of thing. So that's interesting to me on this side of it.
Yeah.
Because not only am I suffering medical trauma, they are. Because they're disconnected from their patients just to have to do what they do. And I think that is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Huge problem. Yeah.
Makes me realize in a much different way why women have like doulas or, midwives, because you're dealing with such a physically trauma-ridden environment. And if you just have the cold, deadpan doctors on either side, like that's what that baby's entering into, as well as what, as an expectant parent, what you're dealing with as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I just, anyway, so I feel like, and then COVID has been has really put a light on that how much trauma the healthcare workers are dealing with, as well as the patients. I mean, I'm not happy about COVID, but I feel like at least this medical trauma thing some light got put on it. So
that's interesting. You think so? Is that because the people coming to you, you're seeing it, or how do you think? Because from my side, I just know they became like a hot commodity, and therefore they could dictate, how much they want to make and what they're willing to do or not do, which is, obviously really good. But then if you're in a position like mine where you need so many and you got to do this, it's definitely made things precarious there.
well, I'm talking about the burnout rate.
And just acknowledging it. Yeah.
Yeah, I got tasked and I did it to do a three-part training to a program at the University of North Carolina, who in their master's program, the social workers that were going through a master's program in healthcare. Health is to be mental health health people, like whatever, therapist or whatever. And social workers, therapists, whatever. This is a program that was helping support them in their health. And I did an hour on ancestral clearing so that we get that intergenerational trauma piece kind of handled. Then I did an hour on trauma-informed yoga, because that's a beautiful practice that's very helpful to clear physically, to move stuck energy that way. And then I did an hour on self-care to prevent burnout.
I love that because there's people just they think when they hear self-care, it's like, I take a bubble bath and, I give myself chocolate and I make myself feel good, which it can be.
Part of it. That's part of it.
but there's definitely more.
Yeah.
It's doing the work too, where you care enough to do the work to not be okay with things that you're not happy with.
Yes, and she was the reason that she had the program was because the burnout rate was so high.
Yeah.
You know, she was getting what was it, 2 to 4, 1 out of every 2 or 4 people were burning out within the first 2 years of getting into that job.
Wow.
So I was like, "What?"
Yeah, that's a lot.
Wow, I'm so glad you're doing this program
Yeah.
because they need tools if they're gonna go into the healthcare field, the mental health care field. I'm not even talking about emergency room nurses and ICU nurses and all that kind of stuff that they had to do in COVID. That's a whole nother thing,
Yep.
right? So burnout is what I was referring to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it is big. And, again, as an employer of, 100 healthcare people, like I hear burnout, I'm like, oh, it's like, okay, you only work 30 hours this week. Are we really at burnout? Or is this now becoming the new catchphrase where people don't want to put in the time? So it's like, I got burnout,
Well,
so
what are they doing to support themselves? What
right,
kind of support are they getting around keeping themselves uh, working their own program?
right.
You see, that's the thing. And
Exactly.
I think that's a wow, that would bring a whole if you as an employer had to address that with all your employees, then you'd have to have a whole nother piece of your business. Like it would be a whole nother business that would be an adjunct to the one you already have.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, luckily for us, we provide everything. We provide our clients, we provide our staff. So, we have the yoga, the CrossFit, the healthy eating, the counseling, the group, the community. We provide everything for our staff as well. So, but you're right, a lot of times when you really pour yourself into others, the first person you neglect is yourself. It's comfortable, it's easy. I'd much rather worry about you than me. And it becomes, especially for people new in recovery and otherwise, it's more comfortable for them to be all in on others and neglect number one.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, that's what I learned in treatment.
Yeah.
It's like I was raised to be in service. As soon as I could walk, they put me into service in my
Yeah.
family. That was I was other focused for and anything that was left over at the end was what I got. But that was kind of the way I was raised, right? So
Yeah.
I get into treatment and and I was um I was used to kind of being the kind of peacemaker between in the family.
Yeah.
That's just the way that's just the dynamic. And an argument broke out while I was in treatment that I heard about within the family, and I wasn't there, right, to be the mediator, right?
Uh-huh.
And I thought, "Oh, we got a problem here." And I went I went to my counselor, I gotta call my, whatever." And she said, "No, you don't." I said, "Yeah, I do. You don't understand." And she said, "No, you don't understand." "What?"
Oh,
"What do I not understand?" And she said, "They'll be fine. You have to take care of you."
yeah.
And I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
So she taught me in that conversation, I had to fill my own cup first, and then everybody else gets the overflow. And that for me was such a role reversal. I
Mhm.
was like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing that was possible. Right?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
again, it's like we start to realize what we identify with, like that is who I am. And I know and I think we're in the same field where we are in service, but there's a fine line between being in service and being a rescuer. And you've got to really like, let people kind of figure shit out, or you're not always going to be there to fix, and I would get just as much out of it as the person that would receive my help. But then there becomes a point, or there can become a point, where it's not a healthy relationship, where you need to help in order to have self-worth, and they need the help in order to feel loved. And then you got to, and this is just years I've been working on this shit, but it's
yeah,
interesting when it all traces down. We all have very similar core beliefs or purposes, kind of thing. At least those
absolutely.
of us in this field.
Yeah. Well, she was teaching me about codependency at that point, which she didn't say the word.
Yeah.
It was too early in my recovery at that point. But I've done a bunch of work around codependency, and the the tricky part for me is don't try and fix.
Yeah.
Like, just can you just hold space and attune?
Yep.
How can I help you in this moment? But, let them tell you, I don't have to. I mean, it's a whole different way of being, and it's taken a long time to unwind that pattern.
100%. a
You
hundred
know?
percent. And I would say even, with that, like I can see relationships with men and women, like men just feel this need to fix. Like, how was your day? Well, this happened, that. Well, they just want to jump in and fix. And it's like, you have to be, at least for myself, solid enough. Like, no, no, I just want you to listen. I don't want you to fix it. I don't need a solution. I
Yeah.
just listen. And that's again learning, like that's okay. And that's okay to have that boundary. And it's okay to have somebody not fix something. Like it could just be.
That's right. Yeah, that's
But
right.
it also is okay to communicate about it too. You don't have to shut it down because you don't want it fixed. You still like can process and move those energies, but at the same time, we're not looking for solution. We're just communicating.